Hi, Michael.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are
Good.
you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Apologies for coming on late. I had some technical issues. I'm traveling at the moment, so the network isn't too great where I'm at the moment.
Oh dear.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, no
One of
problem.
those things.
Yeah, those things happen.
Yeah, they do, they do. Can you
Now
hear me
you're
clearly?
I hear you fine. Now you're going to record this, right? This isn't live.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we're busy recording at the moment.
Okay. When will it air? Do
Okay.
you know yet? Do you know how long before it will
It'll
actually?
air every Monday. A new episode goes up every Monday.
Right. So when will this one actually go up?
It'll go up next week, Monday.
Next week. Okay, great.
Yeah, next week
All right.
Monday. So any of Mickey's clients, a new episode is aired on a Monday, and the previous week's episode goes up on that Monday as well.
Got it. No problem.
Got it. Awesome. Well, Michael, it's an honor to have you here. You are New York Times best-selling author. You are 9/11 survivor, which we are going to touch on. That's going to be a first for the show. And you also love to cook, a creator who loves to cook.
I try.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Cooking isn't
I
quite as fun as it used to be because my wife passed away in November of 2022. We had been married 40 years, and it's really not nearly as much fun cooking for one person.
my condolences about that.
Things happen.
Yeah,
Okay.
life so unpredictable.
Yep.
Yep, yep, yep. So, Michael, I've read all there is to read about you from the material that Mickey has provided me. But I would love, and for the audience as well, to hear from you, directly. Let's go back to day one. You were blind since birth, but you still managed to work yourself up to get a master's degree in physics. So let's start there. Let's start early life, Michael.
Well, so technically, if you want to get totally technical, I am not blind since birth, but I was born 2 months premature and put in an incubator, and medical science had not yet totally accepted that putting a prematurely born child in an incubator with a pure oxygen environment 24 hours a day could result in blindness. So that's what happened, although we no one knew that, no one figured it out for about 4 months. And one day an aunt of mine said to my mother, he's not really reacting to the sunlight. He's over playing in the sun. He's sitting in the sun. He's not reacting. I wonder if he's blind. Well, they took me to the hospital, and sure enough, I was blind. And it was from a condition at the time known as retrolentofibromalacia. Now it's called retinopathy of prematurity. And the result is that I was blind because I was given too much oxygen. It took a while for medical science to understand that even too much oxygen could be a bad thing. But the
Yeah,
doctors, when it was discovered that I was blind, told my parents that they should send me to a home because no blind child could ever grow up to do anything in society, and I would just be a drain on the family. And my parents, and by the way, I had an older brother 2 years older. Well, anyway, my parents said, no, that's not true. He can grow up to do anything he wants like anybody else can, and we're going to give him that chance. And they brought me
yeah,
up with that kind of attitude. So in reality, I grew up believing that blindness wasn't going to be the problem directly. There are going to be things that I might not be able to do as well as anyone else, or I shouldn't say that. There were going to be things that I wouldn't be able to do because at the time we didn't know how to do them. But um, a lot of things have changed in the last 75 years since I was born. But I grew up thinking that I could do whatever I chose. Well, my brother joined the Cub Scouts and then joined the Boy Scouts. I joined the Cub Scouts and then joined the Boy Scouts. I was interested in science and radios and so on, and I got a radio kit when I was like 10 years old. I went to public school. I was born in Chicago. We lived there for 5 years, then moved to California. And along the way, I learned Braille. just like you learn to read print.
Yeah, yeah.
Although too many people think that Braille isn't really necessary today, for example, because they say, well, you can listen to audiobooks. Well, so can sighted kids. But the fact is, you teach sighted kids how to read print. Why aren't you teaching blind children how to learn to read and write? Because you can't do that with audiobooks. Blindness isn't the problem. And that's ultimately the way to summarize what my parents thought, although they didn't articulate it that way. Blindness isn't the problem, it's societal attitudes about blindness. And I can prove that in so many different ways. But the reality is, blind children can grow up to be just as productive and do whatever they choose to do as sighted people can do, and sighted children can do. So anyway, I joined the Boy Scouts. I became an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts, went to public school and high school out here in California. I also joined the Order of the Arrow, which is the Boy Scout Honor Society, and became Vigil, which is the highest rank in the Order of the Arrow. And having always been interested in science, I wanted to go on to college and get a degree in physics. So we looked at colleges and chose the University of California at Irvine, which was about 100 miles south of where I lived. My parents and I went down to visit the chair of the physics department in the summer between my junior and senior year. And after we talked for a while, he said, "Yeah, I think you'd be a good addition to the department. You should enroll." So I did. I was accepted, and I went down to UC Irvine. There were challenges getting books on time in Braille because professors always wanted to wait till the last second to decide what book to use in case something new came out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that didn't work for me because I had to have them put into Braille. I had a good support system at the university. There was a person who was in charge of the office for students with disabilities who said, "You have to work it out with your professors, but if you can't, then I will help you and I will use my power that I have to help you." And you also might want to go make friends with the chancellor of the university just in case that is helpful. So I had several conversations with Dan Aldrich, who was the chancellor of the university, and enjoyed all the things that we got with that too. But between the chancellor and Jan Jenkins Jurgens, who was the woman who ran the office for students with disabilities, I was able to get the information in time to get books put into Braille. You can't do physics as well from an audiobook by any standard as you can by truly being able to read it, just like sighted
Yeah.
students aren't going to do as well unless they can read it. Anyway, along the way, I also joined the largest consumer organization of blind people called the National Federation of the Blind. And I attended my first convention there in 1973 in New York. My mother was from New York, so she came to the convention with me. And a couple of years later, I was approached by the president of the federation at the time, Dr. Kenneth Jernigan, who wanted to offer me a job after I graduated and by the time the project rolled around. And the project was that he had been approached by a guy named Ray Kurzweil, who is an inventor. He's the creator of a concept called the singularity. He's a futurist. But his machine that he developed in the mid 1970s was a machine that literally would read print out loud to blind people. And he wanted to get the machine produced, but he couldn't get the funding. And so the Federation, after discovering that his machine worked, actually um, worked with him to get funding raised to buy several of the machines to fund the project, and also to hire someone who would travel around the country putting machines in various places. They were heavy machines, they weighed about 400 pounds. Putting machines in various places, teaching people to use them, writing training and curriculum, repairing machines, and showing blind people around the country how to use the machines so that they could use them and provide recommendations that need to go in the final machine. And the result of all that was in 1978, in 1976, the job began, and I was the person who was hired to literally live out of suitcases in hotels for 18 months and then wrote the final report to um, tell Ray Kurzweil what we felt needed to be in the machine. And so that was my first job, very fortunately, right out of college. And then I went to work for Ray. So that brings you up to 1978, which is 28 years after I was born.
Yeah, yeah. You like, as you're speaking and you're going along, I'm just thinking to myself, like, you know, it sounds so easy, right? But what sort of emotions, like, was going through you at that period in your life? Like, you had the correct mindset, you had the correct attitude, but what sort of emotions did you ever like doubt any of your capabilities at any point? And how did you overcome that?
I didn't doubt my capabilities, but I certainly had times that I needed to step out and do things. For example, after the Kurzweil project ended with the National Federation of the Blind, and literally I was living, as I said, out of suitcases in hotels around the country for 18 months. I went to a lot of places I'd never been to before. Places I'd never been to before, um, and that was a little bit scary. I didn't doubt that I could do it. I didn't always know how I was going to do it, but I also felt I can. And so I and my guide dog, that was my second guide dog, Holland, traveled. It was good to have a friend with me at all times. That is the dog. And then Ray offered me a job working for his company, doing the same things I did when I worked for the National Federation of the Blind. So I moved to Boston. I had never been there before, now 3,000 miles away from home. But I had lived at UC Irvine 100 miles away from home. And I realized, well, why is 100 miles any less of a challenge than, or more of a challenge than living 3,000 miles away from home? So I traveled to Boston and it all worked out well. And I learned the things that I needed to learn. I learned how to be self sufficient. And yeah, there were challenges, but not challenges that presented such a barrier that I couldn't overcome them. I
Yeah.
realized that a lot of what I had to do was, as you point out, emotional, and that I needed to work through it and succeed. So I went to work for Ray, moved to Boston, and continued to work for him and the company. And then in, I think, June of 1979, I was called into the office of the vice president of marketing and I was told I was being laid off. And I asked why. And he said, "Oh, it's not that you're doing a bad job or anything, but we are an engineering startup. And like a lot of engineering companies, we've hired way too many non revenue producing people. And we have to hire more salespeople to come and sell our products, the reading machine for the blind, and then the new machine that we've developed, which is a commercial product that uh, publishers, bankers, lawyers, others can use to digitize material that's in print. And so we have to hire more salespeople. So we're going to have to lay you off." And then he paused for a second. And then he said, "Unless you're willing to go into sales." You talk about a major paradigm shift. And as I tell people, I thought about it for a micro nanosecond, knowing full well that at the time the unemployment rate among employable blind people was in the 70% range. And so I decided I'd, as I love to tell people, lower my standards and go from science to sales. And I joined the sales force, selling not the reading machine for the blind, but the commercial version. They offered that to me, and I realized that had to be a pretty good compliment. That felt that I could do that, which psychologically helped a great deal. And I learned how to sell it, and I began selling it, and did all the things that needed to be done. So emotions were there, but I also knew that as a blind person, blindness wasn't going to be the thing that would stop me. It would be my own internal barriers that I had control over. And so I realized that I needed to focus and do the things that needed to be done in order to succeed, and did them.
You embraced it, which
Yes,
many fail to do. You embraced it. You know,
which many
you
people
never,
in general fail to do, blind or not.
yeah, you never look at it as something happening to you, more like something happening for you. And how can I turn all of these emotions, even if they are negative, to work in my favor? How can I
Right.
use it to work in my favor? And you bypass like all of that, you know. Yet we live in a world today where so many people can see well, they can hear well, they can walk well, they can talk well, they have all the best unique human capabilities ever, but they lack that self-belief. The self-esteem is so low, As you said, I can do it, you know. And it's
Correct.
so important for someone to tell themselves, I can do this. Yes, there's going to be challenges, there may be setbacks, it may not come right the first time around, but I can do this. I can go for it and I can accomplish it, whatever it
There
may be.
there is no such thing as failure in the world. And I
Yeah.
refuse to accept that there is. What there is in the world is something may not work out the way you expected because you had something to learn. So when something doesn't work, it isn't a failure. It is a time to reflect and decide, how do I alter and make work what needs to work? And one of the most important things that I have learned, and I talk about it in the new book that we published last August, Live Like a Guide Dog: True Stories from a Blind Man, His Dogs, and His Dogs, about um, overcoming adversity, moving forward in faith, and so on. Um, that book talks about learning to control fear, but it really talks about introspection, and it talks about being brave. And that is a choice that individuals have to make. If we would spend more time at the end of each day thinking about what we did that day, what worked, what didn't work, both what worked and what didn't work, what could we make work better that worked, what didn't work, and how can we deal with it? And if we really think about those things, we'll get the answers and be able to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. So since you've already brought up your latest book, which was released August last year, before we touch on Live Like a Guide Dog, um, I would love for you to share, your experience of 9/11. I mean, that was something that affected the entire world. I actually remember it so clearly. I was in the seventh grade at the time.
Mm.
And I remember being at a school play, and all of a sudden, it all just came to a standstill, and everybody is, did you hear what just happened in the US? And that's when all the attention of that school play itself turned to the television, turned to the radio, and it was a shock for the entire world.
Hmm.
Now, for you, being on the 78th floor, you managed to make yourself out with the guide dog. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing the name correct. Roselle, or is it Rochelle?
Roselle.
Roselle. You made it out with Roselle. Can you share that experience with the audience?
Sure. Um, so again, one of the things that I did, and we talk about it in Live Like a Guide Dog, and also my first book, Thunderdog, which was a New York Times best-selling book. What I
Yeah,
spent a lot of time doing when I first started working in the World Trade Center was learning about the company, looking not the company, but learning about the complex, learning all that I could. What were the emergency evacuation procedures? Where were the emergency exits? How did it work? What did the fire people do? What did I need to know to be able to escape? Because sometimes I was in the office alone. I was the Mid Atlantic region sales manager for a computer company. I didn't want my staff in the office. I wanted them out selling and fixing products and doing the things that they needed to do. My job
yeah,
often was to be in the office supporting them, but also from time to time going out on calls with the salespeople and even with some of the engineers, because my knowledge is very technical. I learned a lot about how the products work and could even help diagnose problems. But the bottom line is that I needed to know what to do at any time in the complex because I couldn't rely on other people. And I also knew that sighted people would not be spending a lot of time learning that stuff. They're going to rely on being able to read signs that may say the emergency exit's this way. Well, that works until it doesn't. So for me, I needed to know the information. And I think that's the key. Again, learning it and truly understanding and having that knowledge is the important part. And I didn't realize until much later that I had developed a mindset that said, you know what to do in an emergency. And it just clicked in on September 11th. But what happened was that the plane hit the building 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. So where I was and on my side of the building, no one knew what happened. In fact, I went down the stairs with hundreds of people and no one knew. We figured out an airplane must have hit the building because we smelled the fumes from burning jet fuel, and I identified that odor. It was familiar, and it took a while to realize that it was burning jet fuel. And somebody, when I observed that to others, they said, "Yeah, you're right. That's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane," but we had no details. Now, of course, everyone
Yeah.
says to me, "Well, of course, you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it." Excuse me, sports fans. The last time I checked, Superman and X ray vision are fiction. And the fact of the matter is, the plane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building, which meant there were 18 floors of rebar, steel, and concrete between us and where the plane hit. No one knew where I was. Blindness had, as usual, nothing to do with it. People don't want to
Yeah.
accept
Yeah.
that, but it's true. Blindness had nothing to do with it. And all of us who escaped worked together. There were times that people panicked on the stairs and we worked to help them, but we had to go down the stairs. It was the only way to get out because um, a colleague who was with me in the office, we were going to be doing some sales seminars that day, and David Frank, who was in charge of pricing for my company, Quantum, and dealing especially with resellers and so on, David came back because he was going to help with the seminars that we were doing to teach people how to sell our products. David was going to talk about the pricing. And of course, I was the technical contact and I would be working with people. And the bottom line is that we worked together. But um, David saw fire above us. And that told me that if people are going to get out, they couldn't take elevators because we had no idea what the fire was all about other than that it was there. So David even was panicking, saying, "There's fire. We got to get out of here right now." And I kept saying, "Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here. There's fire above us and millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our windows." And I kept telling David, "Slow down." Other people in our office heard me, and they waited to see what was going to happen. But the thing is that finally David said, "You don't understand. You can't see it." Once again, going back to if you're blind, you don't know. The reality was, however, it wasn't what I didn't see. It was what David wasn't seeing. By that time, I had my fifth guide dog, Roselle. And Roselle was sitting next to me while David was shouting about fire. Roselle was yawning and wagging her tail, giving absolutely no indication of fear, but clearly something, as I love to say, she said, "Somebody woke me up. What's going on? I was sleeping real good here." And that was it. She wasn't indicating fear, which told me that whatever was occurring wasn't such an imminent danger that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way. Roselle wasn't smelling smoke. I wasn't smelling smoke. Roselle wasn't sensing anything else that indicated danger. And I relied on how Roselle was behaving to finally get David to focus. And I told him, "Get our guests to the stairs, start them down the stairs. Do not let them take elevators because you saw fire. And if that fire gets into the elevator shafts, then anybody in the elevator cars is going to die." And of course, that happened. But David got our guests to the stairs and then he came back. We swept the office and we went to the stairs and started down. But the reason I survived, the reason that I was able to function was I had learned what to do. It wasn't a matter of reading signs and hopefully getting the information. I knew what to do. I knew how to get around the World Trade Center. I knew where different offices were. I knew where the stairwells were. I knew where they all led. I knew what the emergency evacuation procedures were and so on. And all of that knowledge is what helped me function and survive in the World Trade Center.
Yeah. Wow. 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 So you wrote the book Thunderdog based on that experience. You never have an agenda to become an author, to become a creator. Was it from your own will based on that experience that led you to writing Thunderdog? Or was it like from the outside? Was it external, people telling you, share your experience and how you managed to get out?
Well, I never thought about writing a book. In 2002, Roselle was honored at the American Kennel Club Canine Eukanuba Championships in Florida. And while down there, we met George Berger, who was the publisher of the American Kennel Club Gazette. And he said, "You should write a book." He said, "And I can introduce you to people and all that." And I started taking notes. And it never really worked really well. But in 2010, I received a call from a woman named Susie Flory. And by that time, by the way, As I tell people, I had over a megabyte of notes that I had written for a book, and I had an idea for an outline. Anyway, this woman, Susie Flory, called and she said that she was writing a book called Dog Tales, and it was going to be 17 chapters about 17 different dogs that she felt it was appropriate to write about. And she wanted one of them to be Roselle. She said, "Would you tell me your story?" And so I spent about 45 minutes telling her the story. And when I was done, there was a pause. And then she said, "You got to write your own book." She said, "I want to do Dog Tales, but you have to write your own book and I'll help you. I'll introduce you to someone." And so Susie and I collaborated. It was a collaborative effort. I wrote a lot of the book. She wrote a lot of the book. We edited each other's parts. We worked together. And her agent, who became my agent, Chip McGregor, found a company, Thomas Nelson Publishing, which is the largest Christian publisher in the world. And now they're part of HarperCollins. But they took the contract for the book. And the result was that we wrote it. And in August of 2011, it was published. And in its first week out, it became a New York Times bestselling book, which was an honor.
Till date, 2.5 million books sold.
Right.
Wow. Wow. Congratulations on the first book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a nonfiction story that honestly, who would not want to read? You know,
Well, and I
if
still
you could,
get emails regularly from people who say, "I just read Thunderdog," and now they also say, "Live Like a Guide Dog." And one of the things that I
yeah.
ask people to do if they've read the book is to go on to Amazon and Reddit and to write reviews, because people look at the reviews. And so we get a lot of good reviews about Thunderdog and Live Like a Guide Dog as well.
So, from all the feedback that you've received since the release of the book and the reviews have you mentioned, yeah, what's the first thing that comes to the top of your mind that your audience is actually taken away from it for their own personal life? What would you say that
And
is?
there's also a third book called Running with Roselle, which was intended to be a children's book, but more adults buy it than kids, and that was written in 2013. Um, People always say, "Oh, I've learned so much about blindness and what blindness is all about from reading your books." And sometimes I think they do, and sometimes it's clear that they really didn't absorb what they should, and it isn't emotionally necessarily something that people buy into. But more often than not, I think people do come away with a little bit different attitude about what blind people can do. They certainly get a good feel for what was in the World Trade Center, because my job, and I didn't even realize it at the time of writing Thunderdog, but I have realized it since, is that one of the things that I get to do is to help people get into the World Trade Center and travel down the stairs with me and come out at the bottom. Now we live in a world with a generation who has no memory of what happened in the World Trade Center. It's all history. And ever since September 11th happened, people have asked me to come and talk about what occurred on September 11th, and they want to pay me to do it. So I became a full time public speaker rather than selling computer hardware. And as I say,
Yeah.
my wife and I decided that selling life and philosophy is a whole lot more fun and self rewarding and satisfying than selling hardware and managing a hardware sales team. So I do that full time. I am a keynote speaker and I travel around the world talking about trust and teamwork. And if any of your listeners and viewers are interested in hiring a speaker, it is what I do, and we'd love to talk with them about that. Um, I'm easy to find at speaker@michaelhingson.com. But the bottom line is that in reality, um, my job is to take people into the World Trade Center and draw them into the point where they're following me down the stairs and then coming out at the bottom and coming out of the whole journey with a real feel for what it was like being in the World Trade Center on September 11th. And that's what I do when I speak.
Yeah. It's sort of, like you found like your true calling. I'm not sure whether you believe in that or not, but it's
Well,
like you found your true
certainly
calling.
seems so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's if we look at, quote, the American dream, the American dream was also built on spiritual capital. And you're
Hmm?
doing that phenomenally well at this present moment in your time. Or you've been doing it so well since, 2011, since the
Well,
release.
since
You've had,
2001,
you've
actually,
had
since the beginning of 2002, I've
2001,
been.
yeah, as you said, you traded in, selling to people hardware, and you traded in profit for actually helping and assisting people around the world,
Right.
which is
And
great.
it is a way of earning an income. I can't do it for free. I can't afford to do that, but at
Yeah,
the same time, I want to inspire people and we work with people to make that happen.
yeah, and you've also changed the narrative. you know it's like, in the world, it's, what can people with disabilities learn from us, but at times, and you are like living proof, what can we
Mm.
also learn from people with disabilities, because there's a
Well,
lot to learn there.
so over the last 2 years, I've written a couple of articles on that very subject. And one of the things that I point out is every single person on the planet has a disability, and we need to reframe and change our view. Disability does not mean a lack of ability. Disability is a characteristic that everyone has. It manifests itself differently for different people, but it is something that we all have. Want proof? Here's the proof. If you're sitting in a room and suddenly the lights go out, you're in a world of hurt unless you've got a smartphone nearby that you can turn the light on from the flashlight, or if you've got a candle or something else so that you can generate light. But you are light dependent. You don't know how to function without light. You can learn somewhat, but you don't know how to function without light. And if the lights go out, that's a problem for you. That's not a problem for me. Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb in 1878. We've spent the last 147 years just finding more and more ways to make light on demand available so that people don't have to be confronted with suddenly the world going dark. But it still does happen. And what Thomas Edison did was inventing the electric light bulb. He presented a way for you to cover up your disability, but it's still there and it does manifest itself from time to time. Why is it that we have to think that
Yeah.
just because there aren't nearly as many blind people as there are sighted people, why do we have to think blind people are less than sighted people? We've got to change the way we view the whole concept of disability. And the fact is, everyone has a disability. Your disability is light dependence, and it manifests itself if the lights go out or whatever. My um, I don't have that disability. My disability, as such, comes about because, in large part, society didn't focus nearly as much on developing the technologies and tools that I need to be able to function like you function. They haven't developed those nearly as much as they've developed your tools because there are a whole lot more of you than me. But it doesn't change the fact that you have a disability. So it is something that we need to deal with. And we've got to get beyond thinking that disability is something that really means lack of ability, because it doesn't mean lack of ability. It's a characteristic.
Wow, you have just hit us all with some real truth right there. I must say, you have hit us with some truth right there. I mean, even in 2025, the moment the power goes off, and I've seen this for myself, I've experienced it for myself, people are having panic attacks.
Hmm.
you know, Panic attacks. Where's the power? How am I going to survive without power? I need the power back on. It's panic attacks. They are
Yep.
going crazy. That is
Yep.
some hardcore truth. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Sure.
It makes so much sense. That's philosophy right there. You know, that's philosophy right there. Honestly speaking, sure.
It is one of
Wow,
the things I
wow,
want people
wow.
to understand. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I'm understanding myself right now. You hit me with some truth right now. You know, I pictured myself in situations at times, when there's no power, and coming from a generation that came into power, came into technology. The moment you don't have access to it or you can't use it, it's like, oh shit. You know, What now? You
Yeah.
know, it feels all like your life is coming to an end. Which is sort of sad in a way. That shouldn't actually like traumatize us.
But it
We should
does.
adapt. It does, yeah, but it does. So being afraid can be a positive thing. Live like a guide dog. What can you tell us about this book?
Fear is something that you can learn to control, which is what the book is really all about. We oftentimes, just like we talked about just now with the lights going out, fear under fear takes over and you don't know what to do, or you've only got one conditioned response, which is got to find a light source. The fact of the matter is, fear is a very powerful tool that we can use to help us function at any time. Um, it would have been, in some senses, probably pretty easy to become afraid when the World Trade Center was attacked and the building shook and so on, and then we had to get out. But the reality is that if you learn to focus your fear and use it as a tool to help motivate you and help make you more observant, and you learn to control that, then you can, in fact, be a whole lot better at being able to make sure that you do the things that you need to do in order to survive and function. So, whether it's the lights going out, whether it's being in a building when it's attacked, and so on, what we all need to learn is to control that fear and focus, and learn also that in reality, things happen to us that we don't have control over. But what we absolutely have control over is how we deal with the things that happen to us. So
Yeah,
for me, what happened in the World Trade Center, I knew what to do, and the mindset kicked in, and I was able to escape and help others do that, and so on, without showing fear, because I used my fear in a very powerful way to help make things happen that I needed to make happen. And I had times along the way that things occurred that I didn't expect, and you work through those. But the reality is that we need to all learn, don't worry about the things that you cannot control. Focus on the things you can control and let the rest take care of itself. We can do that. And if we do, we'll live a lot less fearful, a lot less uncertain lives, and we will be able to deal with our circumstances a whole lot better than we otherwise would.
that is well said. How, for out of curiosity for the listeners out there now who are asking themselves, how can I use fear as a tool?
Well,
What would you tell them?
you need to learn to control fear every day, like I talked about earlier. um, when at the end of the day, take some time as you're falling asleep to analyze what happened that day. What worked? What didn't work? What problem did I have? Why was I afraid of that problem because it didn't go the way I wanted? How do I overcome that fear? And you start to learn things like, oh, if I think it through and if I practice it, the more I think it through and the more I practice it, and the more I think about things every day, the more quickly I'll get answers. And it gets to the point where that mindset is established that tells you that when something happens that you don't expect, don't fear it. Immediately deal with how do you move forward from it? What do you need to do to fix it? The problem is we usually don't do any of that. And so we let ourselves become afraid of everything rather than having a mindset that says, okay, this occurred. I'm not going to be overwhelmed by it. I'm not going to say don't be afraid of it. But what I am going to say is I can learn how to use my fear to say, all right, this is a concern. How do I deal with it? And step back from the fear and use that fear to help focus you to figure out what to do to deal with whatever's going on.
It's also the overthinking the fear that also gets to people, right?
Well,
When you
that's the
overthink
whole
the
issue of
situation.
don't worry
And
about
there's
what you
also,
can't. But that's
yeah,
the whole issue of don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on the things that you can and not worry about the rest. Because most of us are worried about every little thing that comes along. And most of those things, first of all, never come to pass. And, or we worry about all the stuff that we don't have any influence over. And all it does is makes us more fearful.
Also, fear of the future, which a lot of people do suffer with. They suffer of, okay, I got this fear of something that hasn't happened as yet. And what I've evaluated is that's just how the brain is like designed. So
Well,
if you know something important is actually coming up, that's going to be a huge part of your life. Could be maybe a job interview or a conversation with someone that could change my business forever, whatever it may be. I'm automatically sitting here and I'm thinking of worst case scenario. I'm already getting scared and fear is already taking over for something that hasn't even happened yet.
and the way to deal with that is, okay, I have this job interview coming up. How do I best prepare? What do I need to know? What kind of questions might I be asked? How do I answer them? And to systematically think about that. But that has to be a part of your life daily, not just job interview, but everything that you do. If you start to self-analyze yourself, if you will, if you do self-analysis, if you do introspection of you, then you will learn much more quickly how to deal with those things that are not expected. And yeah, you could still get a question that you never anticipated, but you can also learn how to deal with those questions too if you think about it. Oh, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought of that particular one. Um, but because you learn to listen to yourself when unexpected questions are asked, for example, if you really learn to listen to your inner voice, you will learn how to answer those questions.
Yeah, yeah,
But you are the
yeah,
one that has to control that. No one else
yeah.
can.
What you said right there, that inner voice, and let it be natural. I just want to share something, and you can say whether you agree or not. But since we use like a job interview as an example, unfortunately, unemployment, is on the rise. It's not stable. In South Africa alone, it's always on the rise, and people now, because they are so desperate for an income, they end up applying for a job that they're not really in sync with. And I feel that at times, even though, yes, you need an income, but if you apply for a job that you know nothing about, but you're applying for it for the sake of applying for it, the moment you get asked a question, of course, you're not going to have the correct natural answer that's coming and it's flowing out like perfectly because it's not coming from deep within. So I always tend to advise people that, if you are seeking out an opportunity to work in a certain profession, make sure that you're feeling it. Make sure that, it resonates with your heart. Would you agree with that? Is that a way to eliminate fear, knowing that, okay, I'm going for this job interview, but I know that it's a job, it's a career, it's a company that I'm going to be naturally in sync with because I actually have passion and love for it.
Well, and if you decide, for example, I'm going to apply for a job that I'm not really familiar with, look at why you're doing that. And maybe there's a reason for it, but if that's the case, then you have to prepare as well. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm not gonna be prepared for this, so I'm just gonna try to fake my way through." You have to make the decision to learn what you need to know in order to deal with a job interview. What is a job interview? A job interview is nothing more than a sales presentation. You are selling yourself, and you have to look at the job interview in that light. And so, are you prepared to sell yourself? What do you bring to the job? What do you know? What do you need to know? What can you learn to know? The more you are prepared, no matter what the job is, the more in reality you won't really have to deal with fear because the fear will be guiding you, the inner voice will be guiding you.
Yeah, yeah. Now that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's, as we approach, the 1 hour mark here, let's talk about your creative process as an author and as a creator. So the first question is, are you fully independent or are you under a publishing company at the moment, or both? Because I
Both.
know some authors do
Um,
both.
Live Like a Guide Dog was published by Tyndall House, and Thunderdog was published by Thomas Nelson, now part of HarperCollins. Running with Roselle was self-published. um, but I find that book publishers today don't do nearly as much marketing as they used to, so I have to do a lot of it. But
Yeah.
so there's it's a combined effort.
Yeah. No, it works the same as the music industry. I mean, I'm in the
Yeah,
music industry, and
yeah.
it's the same. It's just how it's unfolding now. Even if an artist does manage to get signed to a record label on a fancy 360 record deal, which really is happening today, you still have to do bulk of the work. You
Hmm.
still have to market yourself, you still have to brand yourself, and that's just how it is. But what I've also come to learn from authors is, there's pros and cons with being self-published and also, under a publishing company, and they sort of diversify their work. We're going to say, okay, this book I want to self-publish because of ABC, and this book, yeah, I can move with the publisher, because these are the benefits that will come with that piece of content. So it's more like, okay, what's really going to work for what the end goal of that project is actually for you as a creator. And what is your creative process? You have 3 books on the table at the moment. You know, what's next for you? Is this going to become into sort of a series? Are you going to branch out into different topics as you move along? Because I mean, you speak about leadership, you speak about teamwork. Where are you going next with your career?
From a book writing standpoint, I'm not sure yet. I'm listening to my inner voice, and when the right time comes along and the right subject comes along, then we will write about it. Meanwhile, I do continue to travel and speak and enjoy doing that. So right now, I'm mostly concentrating on that, as well as I do work with a company called Accessi, ACCESSI capital BE, that makes products that help make internet websites more usable by people with a variety of different kinds of disabilities. And Accessibility is pretty cool because they've got some very um, clever artificial intelligent technologies that they use in part, plus other tools to help make websites available to people who otherwise might not necessarily be able to use them because the websites were not created
Nice.
with
Yeah.
disabilities in mind. So I do that as well.
Yeah.
So between those two, and then of course I have my own podcast, which is called Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. So we do podcast episodes, and the neat thing about the podcast is, and the reason we call it Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet, is that if you talk to the typical so-called diversity people, they never include disabilities, and so
Yeah.
I put inclusion first. But the reality is, most episodes deal with the unexpected as opposed to inclusion or diversity, and that is the unexpected is anything other than inclusion or diversity. So most people aren't directly involved in any way with disabilities. My belief is that everyone has a story to tell, and my job is to help draw that story out and help people tell their story. And that's what I do.
Nice. Nice. And how long have you been on your podcast? Or how long has it been running?
It's been running since August of 2021, and tomorrow we will publish episode 323 from the podcast. We've been very visible on LinkedIn. A lot of people have wanted to be on the podcast. So we do 2 episodes a week. We record, and I have a backlog, but we record and publish 2 episodes a week.
So when you say we, there's other people involved with the podcast as
There,
well.
there is a company that I work with called Amplify You, and they do a lot of the back office stuff, and they make sure it all looks good and so on.
Nice. 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 So to conclude, Michael, to listeners out there who have any form of disability, what can you say to them right now when they are feeling demotivated as a creative to pursue their dream, to pursue their art, to pursue their writing, to pursue their musical ambitions, but they just don't feel there's a place for them in this massive world? What would you tell them to keep going on and keep pushing further and above to you explaining your story over the last hour.
Well, and of course, as I pointed out, everyone has a disability, so that's the whole world. And I would say that um, if you're feeling frustrated, if you feel like you can't do something, that's a choice, and you have to change your mindset. But you mostly have to analyze. You have to take the time to think about, why am I afraid? What is it I'm really afraid of? Um, am I afraid of writing? Am I afraid of being successful? Am I afraid that I might be turned down? How do I deal with all those things? And the reality is, all those are possibilities. And so it is something that everyone has to deal with. And the bottom line is that you choose how to proceed and how you want to move on. And the fact of the matter is, we can all make choices that allow us to move forward and succeed. And that's what we have to do. We also can make choices that will cause us not to succeed, and then that makes us all the more frustrated. But we can analyze what we're doing, we can analyze what we're thinking. We have control over that. We have control over listening to that inner voice. One of my favorite examples is, there's a game. Have you ever played a game? It started in the US, called Trivial Pursuit.
No.
Okay, Trivial Pursuit is a game where they have a lot of trivia questions on cards, and there's a board. And when you answer a question correctly, then your piece can move around the board. And many times, people, when a question is asked, they think of an answer right away, and they go, "Oh, that can't be right. That was too easy." And they think about it some more, and they went, "No, that can't be the right answer. It has to be this. That's the right answer." And so they don't give the answer they originally thought of. They give a different answer. I see this all the time. And you know what?
Yeah.
Invariably, the correct answer is that first one that they thought of. We're not
Yeah.
learning to listen to our subconscious mind. We're not learning to listen to the inner consciousness that we have. And that's what crosses us up. We have to
Yeah.
train ourselves to do that. And the people who do are able to do fine with it. We all can learn that. That is a skill every single body on the planet can learn if we choose to.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. You're so right about that. I've seen so many examples of that, even in my own personal life. You overthink the question in front of you. Let's just say, for example, if you're writing an exam, and then you overthink it so much that you end up putting an answer that came way down the line. Yet, the first answer was enough.
And it
It
was the
was enough
correct
for
answer.
Yeah, it was the correct answer. Yeah, exactly.
And we need to
There's
learn to observe and think. One of my favorite stories is, my high school general science freshman in high school teacher came in one day and he passed out a test, and he said, "Okay, just follow the instructions and complete the test." Well, the first instruction was, read all the questions before proceeding. No one did that. Now, I didn't take the test because it was in print, and my general science teacher took me to the back of the room and he said, "You know, this would be a hard one for you to do because it's not in Braille or anything like that." He said, "But the thing is, what we're really going to do is show people one thing, and that is the instruction. The very first instruction said, read all the questions before proceeding. People don't do that. They just start answering the questions. And at the end, the last question said, just answer the first question on the test." But people don't
Yeah,
observe, they don't follow directions. And so the result was that everybody answered all the questions on the test. It wasn't even a science test, it was just a trivial test. But the point was, it was to teach people, you've got to learn to observe, and there's a value in following directions. And I love that because it's so true. We can learn to observe better. We don't need to draw a lot of conclusions. We don't need to second guess. The information is there if we choose to use
yeah, 100%. When you're going through the points of, what people get scared of, there's also criticism,
it.
you know.
Well, and
What
we
a,
always tell ourselves we're our own worst critics. I did that for many
yeah,
years. And only over the last year and a half have I learned That's a horrible thing to say. I am not my own worst critic. I learned that the only person who can truly teach me anything is me. People can present me the information, but I have to take the active role of learning it and teaching it to myself. And so, what I've learned is that instead of saying I'm my own worst critic, I say I'm my own best teacher, which is not only more positive, but it's more accurate. And if I choose to be my own best teacher, I'm going to learn from that.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. I remember when I was in high school as well, and at the time I'm sitting in class, I wasn't bothered at all at what the teacher was saying in front of me. And it was the first time that I ever put lyrics to paper. And I remember how, the students around me were actually laughing at me. And, this is a lesson, for the listeners out there. Today, I've done pretty well for myself, as a music producer. So you just need at times to just block out the noise. And once again, as Michael has just said and emphasized so many times, is listen to that inner voice. Just follow that inner voice and just keep going on and keep pushing, no matter
You
what is
have to
happening around you.
practice it.
Yeah, 100%. You have to believe in yourself, and whatever is getting downloaded, from God, from our creator, you need to go with it because that is your message.
Yep.
And flow with it, and it's going to take you down the right path, the path that you are meant to actually go down, that you were born to go down as a creator. And just to conclude on what you said about being your worst critic, as a creator I should always look at it as a disease, because it should be a disease amongst any form of creator. You put one piece of content together and you just keep listening to it over and over again. I'm talking now about being a musician, and you think to yourself, oh no, I can do that better, I can do that better, I can do that better. And then at the end of the day, you haven't pushed it out to market because now you think it's a complete disaster.
Well, or you look at it in terms of you record it or you create something and then you say when you truly analyze it, I like it, but I think this would make it better. And you take the time to do that, but you have to do it with the goal in mind that you're looking to find out what can I do to make it stronger, not just sit down and say, oh, this isn't good, that isn't good, but how can I
Yeah,
truly
yeah,
make it better? If you truly learn to do that, which is of course the whole idea behind self-analysis or introspection, if you truly learn to do that, then every time you realize, oh, I can make it better, that will be a different thing. And again, you learn to do that not out of fear, but you learn to do it because it truly is the right thing to do.
yeah, 100%. Michael, thank you so much. Where can listeners find you online?
I'm easy to find. My website is www.michaelhingson.com. And Michael Hingson is spelled Michaelhingson. So www.michaelhingson.com. If they want to learn about Accessibe, they can go to www.accessibe.com, and they can even do a free audit of their website to see how accessible it is or it isn't, and then Accessibe can help them fix it. Um, if they want to reach out to me, there's a contact form on michaelhingson.com, or they are welcome to email me at speaker@michaelhingson.com. And if they go to my website, there's a web page there, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast, where they can go find all of the episodes of Unstoppable Mindset. And they can also find Unstoppable Mindset anywhere podcasts are made available. So it's available all over the world. So you can find it wherever podcasts are available. But I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to find a speaker and who maybe has questions. I'm always glad to answer questions. And of course, then our books are available wherever books are sold.
Thank you for sharing that. I will definitely put all of those links in the description. So you've also had the privilege of chatting to President Bush as well. How
Right.
was that experience?
It was great. He, we had a good conversation. It was supposed to be just a photo opportunity, but it ended up being about a 15-minute conversation. it really went well, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, that must have been something.
It was.
Yeah. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your dopeness on the show. This was very educational, very educational. It was good to learn about you, your history, about your art, and thank you for sharing so much value with the audience as well.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. And if
Yeah.
you want to, or if you know anybody else, and if your listeners know anyone who might want to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset, just reach out to me, and I'm always looking for more guests.
Okay, on that, what type of guests are you looking for?
Anyone who has a story they want to talk about and tell about themselves, and if they're not sure whether they have a story, then let's discuss it, and I'll help them find the story. I have
Okay,
I have no agenda.
no. Okay, perfect. Maybe I should also consider coming onto your show as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really do that. Over the last, I would say, a year, I've only been on one podcast where I was actually the guest.
Well, we gotta fix that.
Because I'm on so many podcasts that I host and co-host, I really find time to actually be like, yo, does anybody want to talk to me? And then when I do go onto the show, I'm like, what do I say? Because you're so used to being on the other side, you know. So,
Well,
okay, I will consider that. I
the
will reach out to you and let's
great.
chat about it. As you
Let
said,
us.
we all have a story. And, I know for myself, like I have a story,
There you go.
but
That's all
at
we need.
times it's so hard to actually, explain to people, your story,
Hmm.
because I think for me, it's like I've had so much experience when I interact with people face to face, right? And, they'll ask you something and I will explain it to them, but then they'll be like, you don't get it. You don't get my story. You don't fully get it, or, you're not really learning from my experience of it.
Yeah.
Where I just like reach the point, okay, if you're going to ask Kino about his story, I rather not because you're not going to get it.
Well, so
But
my
that seems
podcast,
to be changing now because now, no, sorry, can continue. Can continue.
my
Yeah.
podcast is not an interview; it's a conversation. So the two of us talk,
Yeah.
and it is fun. And my job is to help bring out the story, whatever it is, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. That's how we should keep podcasts these days. As you said, let it be a conversation. Of course, I know there's questions that is asked,
Yeah.
that comes from the publicist and so on. But I love that, and it's the same as what I love to do with this podcast as well, to keep it as comfortable as possible. Speak your truth, speak whatever you feel is on your mind. And, we all learn from each other at the end of the day. And that's what's going to like advance humanity overall.
I, I have only one rule for anyone who comes on the podcast, and it's a rule that everyone who comes on has to follow, and that is you have to have fun or you can't come on the podcast. That's it.
You need to laugh.
You need
You
to
need to
you
laugh.
need to have fun. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, Michael, I am definitely, for my personal capacity, I will reach out to you to be a guest
Great.
on your podcast. I would love to. You're an awesome guy. So I would love to check that out. I want to get more experience being on the other side of it.
Perfect.
And at least it gives me a chance, to like organically tell my story as well.
Yep.
Yep.
Sounds like a
Okay.
plan.
Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. Michael, thank you so much. And please enjoy the rest of your day and keep doing what you do. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.